Okay, then when they later start their Laserjagd, we see a bit of artillery helping them out. Now again, it was a little bit hard for me to identify those pieces. I would think that those are BM21 Grad models. Why I think that is because the later Grad models, they were basically with the vehicle themselves, while the earlier Grad models were just the artillery piece that could be mounted onto anything. For those of you who may know it, the earliest models were the infamous Katyushas, which the Soviets just strapped onto farming equipment and stuff like that. And this time they did not provide artillery support in the traditional sense, but they basically put up a smoke screen for the TSFs, which kind of contradicts their very title because...
Not smoke screens, but these fragments to try to... That's something...
chaff grenades.
Yes, to first of all confuse the laser betas, to not be able to target the TSFs, and in this case, of course, to have this city scenario where they could split the team to rescue their members, which of course the Stasi and the DDR government would never allow, so they kind of worked around the system with that. And it's something the show didn't mention. There's quite a lot of things I think the show expects you to be a fan of the Muv-luv universe.
And during that very scene, another thing that we already talked about in the review of the first episode, the chain of command. How does it work when the political commissar says one thing and the actual leader of the squad by his own military rank says something else? So basically they are equal, but there would appear frictions within the chain of command, and this is exactly what happened in that episode. Again, quite accurate, and I was kind of happy to see that.
And even so, Gretel Jekyll said herself she considered Stasi to be scum, but she never openly says it and still acts according to order, which is not unusual. I think a lot of people actually working with the Stasi did it to have a certain prestige and not to be to get purged or to live a better life, even though they hate it. It's a lot of workers today work with a boss that they don't like, but I don't think that's necessarily a contradiction.
Yeah, and then later on during Kurt's honorable death, we have his scene where he imagines Vivian right next to him. And he says that he'll give her some chocolate, the good American stuff, as he says. Now, to not be confused, nobody had to suffer hunger in East Germany or stuff like that, but certain luxury products, they were literally luxury. You barely could get bananas or good chocolate and stuff like that. If you had some relatives in the West, they could sometimes send you packages, and if you were lucky and they were not completely ripped apart by the border controls, you could receive something nice, some nice West products. But overall, it was very difficult to get any good Western products or more specialized food. It just covered your real basic everyday needs.
That's not entirely true. My family always talked me about that. If they really wanted, is there shop opportunities where they could get stuff like bananas, chocolate, not everyday need. Like when you lived in the West, you could get that. You go to a shop that sells it and buy it, and it wasn't like they had never the opportunity or rarely the opportunity to get something. Of course, it was a bit more expensive. But depending on the status of your family, how they worked, and they could get in certain cities the chance to buy things. So, but it's not like when you think about buying bananas, you can eat them every day. Not in that case, but it's not like you could eat a banana once a month. It wasn't that bad either. Just to put it into a relation to because a lot of Western people think we never had experienced that before, and I think that caused a lot of friction when the wall fall and people could actually go over to the West and buy things. Like it's a bit of these like these children behind the walls that never had anything or stuff. We weren't, or at least our family members weren't that pitiful. Next up, we see the computer screen with names on it, and I assume it's members that are part of the rebellion or the resistance. That when Marai puts her name as a password into, we see a lot of names on this computer screens, and we have last names like Knoblauch, which is
garlic.
And some other names and some short names. I'm going to list the ones that are a bit weird. So it's maybe they had trouble to find enough names and fill them with more random names. Not you could have these names, but you're more likely to be made fun of when you have certain names. For example, Annette. What was her name? Hosenfeld. It's a name you could use, but nowadays, if you have that name in school, you're probably going to be bullied just for having that name. It just feels a bit ridiculous to Germans now. It's of course not. It wasn't really that much of a problem early on, but just because even some Germans are making fun of these names. So. The last interesting fact is something you noticed.
Yeah, at the very last scene we see the Stasi listening in on our protagonists, and in the background you see a guy highly decorated in a white uniform. Now, I only know of one important figure in the Stasi that had a white uniform with lots of medals and stuff like that, and that was Erich Mielke. And that guy was actually the big boss of the Stasi. Now, in real life, he didn't look much like the guy we saw in the shadows back there. He was a bit more chubby and everything, but due to the uniform, I think it is supposed to be him. Could quite well be, and it would be interesting if they have actual historical figures in this show as well.
Of course, it might be the point that it's just this world's equivalent of Erich Mielke, and we hope in the next episode we get his name or other informations. We don't want to talk about it if it's not necessary in there, but it will be quite important because of his function in the Stasi. And with that, in episode 2, when Theodore was looking at the PC and looked up General Strachwitz and other things, I was already thinking about, do they have the technology to listen into what he's researching? Because, and we now learned that yes, they have. That's kind of important because later in the episode, his sister comes back to the base. Of course, he doesn't know that yet, but it's so fucking obvious that she's a spy for the Stasi. I don't think the show is really trying to hide that. So this might come in that if they know that Theodore is kind of involved, they will use his sister, of course, as bait to get the information they need. Also, this fits perfectly with how the Stasi operated, I think. Then you guys made a few comments. One important fact which I didn't want to say yet is that in the Muv-luv universe, instead of Japan being bombed with 2 nuclear bombs, so not Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but Berlin was bombed in this universe, which of course fits with the origin plan. Originally, the Americans wanted to bomb Germany first, but that was changed last minute, I think.
It was simply changed due to the fact the 2 nuclear bombs that they prepared, they were actually supposed to go to Berlin and Hamburg, the 2 largest German cities. But due to Germany surrendering on May the 8th, 1945, they were not yet ready to be deployed, so they sat on these big weapons and they thought like, oh well, let's use it on the last remaining Axis nation.
Another thing is that in the Muv-luv universe, of course, for the story setting, which is set in Japan, for the development over the years, if you have Japan as the protagonist, it of course makes sense. It would hinder them if after the Second World War they have nuclear bombs dropped on them, so that might have affected that, so that the country itself for the fictional setting would have a better developing standard.
Okay, so another comment was focused on our talk about the werewolf group and the Fasces in the Stasi symbol. Now regarding the werewolf group, of course, there's always this possibility with the alternate timeline and everything that this could not happen. So yeah, it is possible that the werewolf group never came into existence in the Muv-luv universe. So that the Stasi would have this name freed up to use for itself. Could be.
One thing is, in Germany you have a lot of words that are perfectly normal German words that have, because of the Second World War and the Stasi, have a certain connotation to it. Like, for example, Rasse or Volk, which have this slight right-wing this right-wing feeling to it, which is why most German people try to avoid them, even though it's really normal German words. It's just that history made them have given them a bad stigmata, and this is would have been the case with werewolf, why it's not being used. But if the group never existed, this stigmata would of course not apply to the word, and so it could be used.
You basically have to compare it. If you are American, for example, a lot of people would tiptoe even around words like black, even though that is not necessarily a bad word with any derogatory meaning behind it. So it's kind of like that for these words that were also used by National Socialists in Germany. Now, regarding the second criticism, yes, I did not point out that the Fasces as symbol of fascism would definitely not be used by socialist countries, but I didn't do that simply because it felt like pointing out the obvious. I mean, as I already explained, the Stasi symbol is a blatant copy of the American Grand Seal, so yeah, the US were also the main big bad enemy for East Germany, and therefore that was just as unlikely. But at least for the Fasces, we had this basic explanation as to why it could have been used, together with that sword. You know, these two aspects of an elite fighting force and these guys who enforce authority and obedience to their other fellow East Germans. And the Fasces itself, while being such a symbol of fascism and everything, to this day it is used by many nations. There are certain symbols in the US that feature the Fasces, even of a French Republic to this very day, because it comes from the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire had such a large influence on Western culture as a whole that to this very day you find it in a lot of proud nations, but yeah, socialist nations would have tiptoed around it very heavily.
So that was it for this episode. Next two episodes are going to be only with me, and we heard your criticism about the echo in the room. We can't help it because the room is so big, and we can this is in the university of the Martin Luther Universität. So when I'm at home, we don't have that problem, but of course, since we live in two different cities, he can't be there, but he may do audio records and send them to me, so he still is in the episode, as he is the guy that gives us most of the knowledge about the equipment and the backgrounds. He is kind of necessary for these videos. So yes, if you liked it, of course, share it on social media. On Reddit, I'm not that experienced with Reddit, so I appreciate it. Subscribe if you want to see more videos. it's really getting tiring to say that every time. Please subscribe and like the video and, just do what you like and see your next episode. And remember, we can say it, we're German.